Welcome to DeepTech315. I'm Gene along with Doug. Our three topics today are the release of Cybertruck, second, Elon Musk comments related to OpenAI and the broader threat of AI. And lastly, we'll talk about Elon Musk's comments relative to Disney and them going and go F themselves. So we'll bring it back to the top. The first topic is Cybertruck, something that I've been waiting for a long time. I placed my order back in November of 2019. As soon as that ball broke the glass, I thought, I think I'm going to give this thing a shot here. And I've just, spoiler alert, Doug, we haven't had a chance to talk about this, but I'm going to ask for that refund on that order. The price was just outside of what I was comfortable with. I thought I was going to come in at 80,000 for the tricked out version. They call it Cyber Beast. It's $100K. And the more affordable version, which I was hoping would be out next year, but being the $50,000-$60,000 version at 60 initially, isn't going to be out until 2025. And a three-wheel drive, that just doesn't work in Minnesota. And I've got a nice Ram truck that's working great
gas
for me.
Powered.
So, pardon?
Gas powered truck.
Yeah, it is gas powered. The quick aside is that as I was watching the video and seeing the different features within, I mean, the price didn't come out to the end, but I didn't tell you about this, Doug, but I backed my truck up and hit the very edge of a construction sign. It was parallel parking. The sign came over, crashed, and I got about a $1,500 dent in the side of my pickup. If I'd have Cybertruck, that probably wouldn't have even been a scratch. So put that in the category of a cool feature, but it's just outpriced the market.
It's expensive. And I think the other thing that is worth thinking about in the context of the launch is we talk about Cybertruck, first heard about it several years ago. And now we've got these 2 million plus reservations.
I think it's a million plus. That's the funny thing.
Was it a million? I thought it crept over.
But it says it's 2 million, but Tesla says it's 1 million plus. I take Tesla's number.
Yeah. The bottom line, though, is you think about what's happened with interest rates from when Cybertruck was announced to now when it's finally coming out. The world is in a completely different place. We had zero rates essentially for much of the time as we were thinking about Cybertruck launch. I think people putting deposits down, and you talk about price, $100K with a 0% rate environment when you're talking about auto loans that maybe are low single digits annualized is very different than a world now where we're talking about high single digits or even above that in terms of rates. So that's going to have an impact in terms of how many get delivered. That's not an indictment on the truck. I think the truck is cool. It's definitely unique. But I do think the rate environment might tamper a little bit of those pre-orders ultimately coming through.
My big picture sense here is two takeaways. Number one is that this is going to be a sideshow for the next couple of years. I think they'll do 35,000 or less vehicles next year, maybe 75, 125 in 2025. It starts to really ramp in 26. And so think of this as like a Model S or X for the next few years, but eventually the price has to come down. Tesla wants this to be a mainstream vehicle. They got to get that price closer to the F-150. A typical F-150, albeit not as good of a car, runs about 10K less. So they need to really hit that 50, 60K price point. There is another kind of vector to this whole conversation about Cybertruck and all that's anticipated. And that's basically that they're doing a lot when it comes to innovation around the truck. Granted, it's really expensive, but this battery share feature where you don't have to buy a battery pack. And I'm considering buying a battery pack, but now I'm just thinking, well, if I just get the truck, then I can save my 12 grand on a battery pack. Like that was like innovative features. They got a 240 plug in the back of this thing. I mean, like you dry clothes out of this. I mean, it's pretty wicked what they're doing. And that just stands in contrast to me to what traditional auto is doing, which I feel like they're just kind of like iPhone upgrade cycle. It's just kind of marking time where I give Tesla credit for at least getting out there and being innovative.
I think they've always carried that flag, and that's something I think they'll continue to carry. I don't know that traditional auto will ever be the most innovative. I would also say, though, I don't know how useful or how many people are going to buy a Cybertruck just because they could plug a dryer into it. I don't think that's a killer feature.
I think it is either.
It is cool. It is cool, but I don't think that people are going to make that the trade-off between if they want a Lightning or a Cybertruck. I think it's going to come down a little bit to something more simple, which is Do you love the design and the aesthetic of the Cybertruck, which is very
Hmm.
unique? Or do you like a traditional pickup where I believe actually the bed on the Lightning is a little bit bigger and more utilitarian than the Cybertruck? And so
Yeah, it is.
I think
It's four by six versus 4x8.
you're going to have use case differences. You're going to have aesthetic differences. Those are going to be much more important than some of these other features that, while cool, I don't think are going to be the deciding factor if people are really making choices between a Cybertruck and a Lightning or a Rivian.
So that ped the height of the side of the bed's a huge deal. With my truck, I on a weekly basis I'm putting handing stuff over when I'm getting in the truck, throwing it in the back there, and I think that is something that's probably like this biggest X factor that I think may hinder it from being mainstream. They got to fix that piece of it. So let's shift to our second topic, which is the DealBook Summit, a New York Times DealBook Summit, and Elon Musk's interview. There was a lot there. The first piece that is made the DeepTech315 was related to some of his comments related to OpenAI, and they were kind of along this line that they're taking copyright information. He said that they're just lying when they're not saying that they're taking copyright information. My sense is they probably are. That Elon's right that OpenAI probably is training on that, and I don't know. Does it matter?
At this point, I don't think it matters. I think it's one of those genie out of the bag sort of things. Almost like if you think back to Google and search, and I think there was a lot of debate at one point about news and, can Google distribute news? It's in one ways it's good for the news publications because they get distribution from the biggest platform on the planet. On the other side, does it hurt their ability to monetize from an advertising standpoint, things like that? And I think we've seen news evolve much more toward paid subscriptions and a little bit away from advertising, probably as a result of some of Google's actions. So to bring that back to the AI piece, I mean, certainly, and we saw this with Twitter and then ultimately Threads, some of the throttling that we've talked about in the past, where there are bots that go and they're just ripping information off of social networks, they're ripping information off of Reddit. So certainly these models are being trained on some information that they probably shouldn't be. I just don't know how that will change. I mean,
Yeah.
will we eventually see agreements in place between an OpenAI or an Anthropic or Google and some of these other providers to access data? Maybe that's what it ultimately turns out being, and it's just an economic thing. But I don't think that's going to slow down the development of these models in any meaningful way.
My thought too came on that it's really hard to track this. It's going to be hard to, litigate where this copyright goes, and ultimately is that this idea of kind of siloed data. I guess that's different than copyrighted data. Is that siloed data is still going to be siloed? There's probably still a competitive advantage for certain businesses that can capitalize on siloed data. So this is really two different things. We talk siloed data versus copyrighted data, but in the end, my sense is that it was for me, it was just kind of the latest jab between Elon and OpenAI, and I think that he's got a bone to pick there, and this kind of seems to be it's not a huge deal, but seems to be his latest, and probably in a few weeks he'll have some other bone to pick with him.
Well, and I think Grok is still the one of the most exciting things in AI that's a total wild card right now. Like it really
Why?
hasn't.
What's the big wild card about it?
Well, because it is taught specifically and intentionally on the trove of Twitter data. So you think about what is OpenAI learned on? It's learned on the vast expanse of the internet, all the good and bad that comes with. Grok is really, I think, going to be trained in a much more real-time way. It's going to have a more probably real-time feel, like the actual conversations that are happening on Twitter, which is the most real-time social network of all the social networks. That's the kind of data that's going to be going into Power Grok. And so I think that's fundamentally, in some ways, in some use cases, more interesting than what OpenAI will ultimately do, what Gemini will ultimately be powered on.
So
And
Grok,
to,
by the way, this is going to be a foundational model, just like the other
yep,
four foundational models.
exactly. And I think if you think about the foundational models, I mean, OpenAI, right? They've created advantage through reinforcement learning. I think they've spent more and they've done more, reinforcement learning through human feedback than any other company in the world. I think that is really what's created their biggest advantage. OpenAI, Google's got 2 decades worth of data of consumers literally saying, "I want to see this, show me this," and then clicking on things to show them when Google's right. And so that's going to be a huge advantage for them. Likewise, I think Grok with that Twitter data, that is something that's wholly unique versus some of these other foundational models. And so as that starts to roll out more and become more widespread, I know there's been some people maybe who are skeptics that are teasing because it's got this sort of maybe Elon persona. It's got a little edge to it, but forget the edge. Let's just see what the service
Mm-hmm.
actually does. And if it does something unique and interesting, that could be another kind of layer, another step forward in this AI race.
Lightning round. Do you think Elon's view of, I'll let you go first here. Do you think Elon's view of wanting to be more metered and measured around the rollout of AI more broadly is going to change how aggressively he's going to roll out Grok and what Grok can
I
do?
doubt it. Yeah, I doubt it. I think, he has been, to be fair to him, he has consistently sort of talked about his concerns about what could happen with AI. I mean, that's why he was one of the big founders, one of the original funders of OpenAI, almost a
Mm-hmm.
decade ago. And so I think it is a genuine concern for him. But I'll go back to the whole genie out of the bottle idea, right? Like all these other companies are doing it. And at some point, my guess is he's a very logical person. He's going to say, well, yeah, I could sit back and wait and be quote unquote responsible. Or I can take the technology we've built and put it out into the world and kind of see how the world uses it. And it feels more like that's probably what's going to happen, despite what he says about, being safe and the imperatives of safety around AI.
Mm-hmm. I'm in your camp. I don't know when safety ever has stopped him from doing anything. Look at FSD. I mean, that is not safe to be out in beta, and yet he sees the benefit of pushing it to get to what it ultimately should be, which is cars should drive themselves. And so I think his history is that he wants to really promote this technology. I think he's going to be all over it, which gets to one of the uh, bigger topics of the week here, Elon and telling advertisers to go F themselves. I was initially shocked and then thoroughly entertained by it. I admit that I watched the video many times and just enjoyed the concept of somebody standing up to big advertisers that just appealed to me. And my thought is just like, what, beyond just the pageantry of the whole thing, does it mean anything for his brand? It's a good move for his brand.
I think net it probably is. I mean, he over the last couple of years, really, it seems like he's embraced being a polarizing figure. Love me or hate me, but don't not care about me has sort of been his mentality. I mean, in some ways, if you think about what works on Twitter, conflict is what works on Twitter. I mean, that's what Twitter is. It's this real-time conflict social network. And I think in a way, like his persona lends well to that. He in some ways, maybe by extension, is the perfect owner of Twitter because he embodies what the network stands for. And so I think he's just kind of taking it to the extreme. And I would say, like, I've heard various different debates about, the advertisers really don't need X, which I think is true. They can go and just reallocate those dollars elsewhere and probably get similar or maybe even better return on their spend. So it's not just about, them leaving X for any economic or performance reasons. I think what Elon's taking issue with, and fairly, is that they're making this political statement around, being moral and saying we don't want to promote hate and these other things. And I think he takes a strong
Yeah.
objection to that. He went out and he said something wrong, number one. And number two, if these advertisers really do care about avoiding platforms that supposedly spread hate, they absolutely shouldn't be advertising on TikTok. They absolutely shouldn't be
Mhm.
advertising on Instagram. Those are bigger platforms. They spread just as much hate, if not more. And there's been some recent studies that they may actually spread more hate. And so I think there's just a hypocrisy he saw validly and said, hey guys, like, F you.
Mm-hmm. My head scratcher here, we'll end on this, was Disney shares were actually up fractionally the day after the market was down. I was thinking they're going to get some cancellations of streaming service based on this. So I can't wait to hear Disney's next earnings call to see if they talk just about that. I can say we will be talking again before Disney's next earnings. We'll see you next week. On behalf of Doug and Gene and DeepTech315, bye for now.